Hey everybody, Ace here, bringing you another collections video. This video is actually just going to be an update video. You know, sometimes I'll do an update on some stuff that I recently got before I do an actual collection, like a full collection video for a console. But since it's been quite a while since I did one, and I've picked up quite a few games, I'm just going to do a simple video just giving updates on consoles that I've already talked about. Starting off with a couple of NES games that I actually got at the Austin flea market recently. Starting off with this interesting game called Star Voyager. This is definitely one that doesn't hold your hand and kind of requires you to have the instruction manual to know what to do. I did find kind of instructions and story online. Basically, you have to keep these rebel forces from getting to your base. And every time you start the game, the star map that you get is randomly generated. So, I mean, that's basically the premise of the game. But for a game made in 1986, the game looks pretty good and has a lot going for it. So I definitely look forward to playing this one a bit more. Next up on the NES, like I said, I got these at the flea market, so this one's a little bit beat up, but we got Smash TV, which I didn't even know was released on the NES. This one's also a bit interesting because Smash TV is a twin-stick shooter, and obviously on the NES controller, there's no second stick, so to speak, to be able to shoot. So basically, you move around with the D-pad, and you can either press A to shoot in the direction you're basically the direction you're facing, or hit B or hold down B to kind of strafe and keep firing in the same direction. However, to play single player, you actually can use both controllers in the NES, one D-pad for movement and the other D-pad for the directional shooting. So it can still work as a twin-stick shooter. Now, Smash TV works great as a multiplayer game, and with the multi-tap, you can actually have both players use 4 controllers to be able to basically treat it as a twin-stick shooter. So this is definitely interesting. Like I said, I didn't even know it was released on NES, so I just had to have it. Next up, we have a few N64 games, starting with Beetle Adventure Racing. This one is kind of interesting because I was definitely one of those ones who's like, oh, it's the new Beetle. Like, this is a racing game based on the new Beetle. But as you can see, it was made by Electronic Arts. And the interesting thing about this game is they were planning on making a Need for Speed video game for the N64. I don't know exactly why they changed plans, but basically they just used the Volkswagen Beetle license and put that over an actual Need for Speed Racing engine. So because this has that awesome Need for Speed Racing engine from like, I believe it's like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit or something like that, it's a really solid racing game. I mean, EA used to make really good Need for Speed type racing games, and this one's no exception. If you don't have this game, definitely give it a shot. It's really worth it. Next up is another one I got from the same flea market run from before, so it's a little beat up, but we got Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, which I remember renting quite often back in the day. But this is also a really good, solid racing game. They took pretty much the only good part from the first, or for Episode 1 Star Wars, and made a solid game around it. And so, yeah, it's a lot of fun, and actually looks really impressive. Like, the visual style and the graphics are really impressive for for the N64. Last but not least, apparently since I am a big racing fan, we got Excitebike 64, which I never really played much Excitebike on the NES, but I remember renting this one also quite a few times in the past, and I had a lot of fun with it, and it's a really fun motocross racing game. So if you don't already have it, shame on you. Next up, we have a Sega Saturn game that I didn't even know about until Chase told me about it, called Mr. Bones. This game is really quirky and interesting. As you can see, where's it? Oh yeah, here. It is a Sega Saturn exclusive, which they say on the Sega Saturn game box, and they tell you this is only available on the Sega Saturn. So if you didn't know that you were buying a Sega Saturn game, this is only available on the Sega Saturn, so that you know that you're buying a game for your Sega Saturn. Anyway, the game is pretty interesting in that it's kind of a very multi-genre game, and it follows the story of this guy using alchemy and science and a big old drum set. Basically tries to awaken a skeleton army to purify the world with evil. Well, Mr. Bones here was pure of heart, so he wasn't affected by the evil skeletism. He was affected by the good skeletism. And he was an old blues guitarist in his previous life. So the interesting thing is the entire soundtrack is some really awesome blues music. And at one point they actually did have the soundtrack available. I don't have the soundtrack disc, but there's a really good YouTube playlist out there. Just search for Mr. Blues soundtrack and give it a listen. You will not be disappointed. It's a 2-disc game. Disc 1 is missing because it's actually in my Sega Saturn right now, but this case is actually in really good shape. So, it's not for everyone. It's really hard and unforgiving. Like, you get one life, and there's no saves. That's it. You die, you start the game over. And it's really hard, so you will die a lot. Moving on to the Sega Genesis. I picked up a single copy of Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. I never actually had the copy by itself. The only time I'd ever seen this game is with there was a Sonic 3 pack that had Sonic 1, Sonic 2, and this, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, which is basically Puyo Pop with the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog skin. And it's also interesting because Sonic isn't even in this game. It's nothing but Robotnik and all of his robot henchmen and stuff. So it's a really hard puzzle game. It's fun, it's quirky, and I'll probably talk about it in my Sonic retrospective because it is Sonic related, so yeah. And speaking of Sonic retrospective, there's another interesting find at the local retro game store. We have Sega Club Wacky World's Creative Studio, which is basically Mario Paint, but for Sega Genesis. And I saw this box behind the counter, and I didn't realize it was facing you, so it looked like just a normal, cardboard Sega Genesis box. I didn't realize it was a bigger box, and they actually have everything in this game, or in this package. We got the instruction manual. It actually looks like it was photocopied or something like that. I don't know. This probably was a late game. They kind of cheaped out on the instruction manual. And we got the game cartridge. And I am now the proud owner of the Sega Genesis mouse. It has all 3 buttons here for A, B, and C, and button over here on the side for the start button. And because this was made in the early 90s, it's a trackball mouse. And to top it all off, it even comes with the Sega Genesis Mega Mouse mouse pad. So that pretty much wraps up this video, and it's a good thing I decided to make this little update its own video because it ran about as long as I expected. And I don't expect you guys to sit around for a much longer video. So, thanks for watching. You guys take care.